Welcome to Dental Nachos TV. I am so excited for what we are sharing today because this does not just help dentists, it helps anyone in the Dental Nachos universe learn how to plan for their future, save money for the future you, make good financial decisions. I'm thrilled to have our awesome sponsor here. Would you just introduce yourself and tell us what you do to help dentisting humans, I will call them, dentists and other people?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, my name is Mo. I'm the founder and CEO of Frec, and yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is my second company. Yeah, it started out back in 2008 as a founder, and had a company got acquired by Twitter. Then helped with the founding of Instacart, and then this is sort of like the third act. I've built this really for myself to solve a big problem I was facing with managing money, and I'm excited to share the learnings with this group.
I love that. I want to share with people text Frec to 215-543-6454. You'll get connected with this awesome sponsor and company. I also know my grandmother's right, Mo. I am special, so I think you treat the audience, the Dental Nachos world special if they do something through you. Is that correct? They'll get some sort of TLC for being a nacho fan.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. You'll get
Um,
a special promotional offer.
Awesome. And before we go into your webinar, I love the entrepreneurial journey. I am working two companies. One I named after an appetizer, Dental Nachos. The other one, Dentist Job Connect, helps people find jobs in the dental space, associate dentist and practice owners to put them together. Tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey before we turn the webinar over to you.
Yeah, so for me, I've been in building products for a long time, and the first product I built was back in 2008. It was an application on back in 2008 that wasn't very common. The iPhone just come out, and the App Store had just come out, and we built something called TwitVid, video for Twitter, which looking back at that, that was a massive mistake, right? The important thing is to learn from the mistakes. So
Yeah.
I went out and I raised a lot of money for that company from venture capitalists, about $12 million in
Wow.
capital for a feature. It was a feature that was supposed to really be built by Twitter. They hadn't built it yet, so we thought there was an opportunity. It was a race. Can we get critical mass before they do? They end up winning, of course. We got absorbed by them. That was there was this company that I'm building now really is a reflection of all of these learnings,
Yeah.
trying to basically do the right things from the beginning. And we've been doing this for the past 3 years, and it's been going really well. And yeah, I'm excited to learn to share kind of how we've done it right this time around.
I love them. I was just was a post making some posts on Facebook today. And one was simple. One of my team members said, "When did you start your Roth IRA?" And someone jumped in and said, "One of my biggest regrets was not starting it sooner." And I just love that you're sharing not just the wins, but also things you wish you did different, mistakes that you made, so that wise people, smart people learn from their own mistakes. Wise people learn from the mistakes of others. So I'm thrilled to have you. I'm going to turn this over to you. You can share your screen. People we have, I'm so impressed by how many people we have watching in live. Many of you are watching this on demand later. If you're watching in live, you are the most important person here. So please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We will get to those at the end. Be on the lookout for some polls that pop in. And Mo, that looks great. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll be back in a little while.
Okay, awesome. So, what our company does is it helps you save money on your taxes from your investments, from your public market equity investments. So, if you have a bucket of money that you're putting into a Vanguard ETF or some kind of a passive index, we help put that to work such that it generates capital losses for you to save on your income tax, right? And so I'll explain exactly how we arrived at this idea and how it works, and then we'll walk through sort of like a bunch of other demos and questions, and answer sort of like any kind of things that you have in mind. Please leave them in the chat, and I think Paul, you feel free to sort of like save these till the end, or if there's something that's very pressing, to interrupt me and ask me those questions. So first of all, I'd sort of like to start this by by laying the groundwork of how we got here. And so, you know, initially in the 70s, in the 1970s, if you wanted to buy, the US market, for example, exposure to the US equity market, you'd buy a mutual fund. And that was kind of the way to go. The problem with mutual funds is that every year, let's say the market was going up 10% a year, for example, just hypothetically, you'd pay your taxes every single year on the gains, right? Even though you haven't sold the mutual fund, right? And that was very tax inefficient. So people invented this vehicle called the ETF, which now we take for granted, but it's the way you buy exposure to large caps or S&P 500, for example. You go and you buy VOO or SPY, right? And that's very efficient tax wise because you basically are only pay the tax when you sell that asset, right? When you're retiring and you're living off of your investments, right? Now, there's an even better product out there that actually has been used for decades as well, but by very, very wealthy families, right? We're talking about billion-dollar plus family offices, and it's called direct indexing. And what this direct indexing does is it gives you an even greater tax advantage because what it does is as you're holding the index, right, the S&P 500, not only are you not paying taxes every year, you're also generating capital losses. So every year you get a 1099-B in the mail, right, or over email, and it says, well, you track the index, you got the same returns as the ETF, plus or minus a small tracking error, which we'll talk to about in a minute. But also, you've generated these capital losses that you now can carry forward for life. And then whenever you have a capital gain in the future, you can use these losses to offset that gain and basically not pay taxes on those gains, right? And plus, there's this other element of personalization. Now you can buy the S&P 500 minus Uber, plus this, plus that, which, is kind of the cherry on top, but I don't think it's the main draw for the product. What is direct indexing? It's not the sexiest name, so we will try to explain kind of what it is and how it works. Think of it as a tax deferral strategy. Obviously, everyone in this room is quite smart. You all are professionals, and so there's no like sort of like free lunch here, right? When basically what it does is if you have a tax payment that's owed tomorrow to the IRS, you're able to delay it and defer it for down the line. You kind of pay that same tax payment, but 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And think of it as kind of like an interest-free loan from the IRS. And by deferring your tax further down the line, right, you do two things. A, you have that money in your pocket, right? And so you're compounding that money. And the chart on the right is a Goldman Sachs chart that describes the benefit to you when you essentially hold on to the gains and compound them and then pay them later. So there's quite a big alpha there, right? And then the second advantage is actually, if, and not to sound morbid, but if you do die before you actually sell, right, and you pass down your assets to your beneficiaries, there's a step up in cost basis, right? So maybe that loan is completely forgiven at that time, right? So there's a massive advantage to basically pay taxes later, right? Pay taxes later is the only way you win. And you end up basically compounding the cash, A, and B, step up in cost basis in the case of death before you use that money, right? And so how does that work exactly? What is a direct index? How does it work? How does it do this magic? So think of it this way. I mean, I'm sure most of us here in this room have bought an ETF like SPY. And so instead of buying a piece of the fund, SPY is a big fund, you're buying a piece of it, right? Instead of doing that, what instead we do is we decompose that ETF into its constituents, right? Into, well, Nvidia 7%, Apple is 5%, Microsoft, Exxon, Coca-Cola, etc. So we go and buy these 500 stocks in the S&P 500 at their target weights, right? And we actually license the index from the S&P or from Standard and Poor's. We've got all kinds of indices. There's you can choose your index, Russell 3000, Russell 2000, the CRISP index, the VTI index. It all exists, right? But instead of buying the ETF, you're decomposing, buying the individual component. And now if a stock comes down in value, which if you are looking at your stock app today, a lot of them are coming down in value, right? You sell it. It automatically sells it, right? And it books the loss. It books a loss and it puts that money into something else, temporarily exchanging it into something else that's closely correlated to the index, right? To the thing you just sold. So if you sold Tesla, it goes and figures out through a sophisticated risk model that selling Tesla, you need to buy these other 7 stocks, maybe Rivian, maybe Ford, etc., that are correlated with Tesla, right? For 30 days. And we do that to avoid the IRS wash sale window, right? And then basically after 30 days, right, you come back into Tesla and you do this over and over and over again all the time, right? And you kind of are tracking the index very, very, very closely, as I'll show in a second, while capturing all of these capital losses. And at the end of the day, you're capturing all these cap losses. You're still tracking the index as if you bought the ETF, and then you can save money on your tax bill, right? And so that's how the extremely rich do it, right? And what Frec is doing is they're bringing this to everyone else. So everyone without the big minimums that you needed before, the $1 million plus minimums, now you can do it at a $20,000 minimum, right? So, um, okay. So this is what it looks like. But this is what a direct indexing account looks like, right? You have with an ETF, I have to admit it's a bit simpler. You just buy SPY at Vanguard or VOO or whatever. But here, you have to put in the money, and what it does, you just say, I want to put $20,000 or 50 or whatever the number is. In this case, it's a $50,000 account, right? And this is what it looks like. First, you see all the holdings, right? You actually own all these things. You own the Nvidia, the Apple, the Microsoft, the Amazon, which by the way has a lot of benefits. Now you can, you get the dividends right away when Nvidia or when Apple pays dividends. It's in your account right away. You don't have to wait for it to be paid quarterly like the ETF does. You can lend out these shares actually and make money through stock lending. You can vote these shares the way you want to vote them. So, I mean, these are kind of like side benefits. Obviously, you can like edit the index, be like, I don't want Apple, right? Or something like that. You can do that. But, that's kind of what happens is we buy them at the target weights, right? And then you track them. Every day you get to see how far you are from if you had bought the ETF itself. In this case, you're off by about $100. And if you hover over some other days, you'll see you're over by about $100. So you're floating, plus or minus. There's a tiny tracking error, and I'll explain why. But in exchange for that flexibility in tracking, the tiny tracking error that we're talking about, plus or minus, you could be plus or minus a maximum of 1% a year, right? You get these tax losses. And then you can use these tax losses to offset real sort of like income tax, right? Whether it's capital gains or ordinary income, I'll explain exactly the numbers in a minute, right? So the question becomes, well, how much can I get in cap losses, right? How much can I get? And so this is a Vanguard chart, by the way, using their tax alpha calculator, the sources here. It depends on the decade. It looks like, from what I'm seeing over the past couple of days with the tariff announcement, that we're going to have a lot of volatility. So we're probably going to look like something like in the 40 to maybe 60%. So if you invest $100,000, you can expect to track the index. You get the same performance as the ETF, plus or minus, while harvesting anywhere between 40 and this chart is 80%. So anywhere between 40K and 80K in losses on the 100K you invested, which you can use to then offset your tax bill, right? You while still tracking, so you're not giving up, the performance, right? And it depends really on the index that you buy. So some of the more, the small caps, very volatile, low returns over the past decade. You harvest a lot more. This is over 5 years, by the way. This data is over 10 years. That's why you'll see a bit of a difference. And then the mid caps, a bit more. The large caps a bit less because they don't move as much. But you harvest. Your harvesting depends on sort of like what index you buy, right? And then the other property about direct indexing is it's front loaded. So you get all the losses up front, right? Or in the first 5 years, I would say, then it kind of plateaus. But as you make more direct deposits, every direct deposit is a curve that looks like this, right? So the direct deposit you do in year 2 kind of starts to look like this as well and decays as well in that fashion, right? And so this is a good thing, right? You want your losses up front. You want them in the early years, not in later years, in case you have gains to offset, right? And so I'll talk later. There's a new product we're building called the Long Short Direct Index that if anyone here is familiar with AQR, the hedge fund, they do a 130-30, 140-40 long short direct index where the losses actually continue to go up. So we're excited about that new product on Frec coming up soon. Okay, so yeah, so why is this happening now? What changed in the industry such that direct indexing is a thing? So by the way, some people call it an SMA. So you might hear, for example, an advisor call it an SMA. It's the same thing, a direct index and SMA. Well, the reason now it's becoming more prevalent is because we can buy fractional shares. And the reason why in the past, I would say maybe 5 years ago, you needed at least $1 million to do this is because you couldn't buy 4.8583 of Nvidia, right? You needed to buy one whole share of everything, which meant if you want to really replicate the S&P 500, you need a lot of money if you're buying whole shares. But with fractional shares, you can decompose the stocks into fractions and really track closely without needing a huge minimum, right? So that's kind of the magic, and this is why Frec today is viable. 5 years ago, I would say it wouldn't have been as viable. Okay, so let's now talk about the tax advantage of direct index over ETF. I want you all to understand this and to visualize it. It's really important, right? Like, what exactly is the advantage? How am I getting a benefit out of this? So the first use case, the very obvious use case, is you put money, instead of putting it into the ETF, you put it into a direct index, right? And then now you have these capital losses, and then you have some other source of gains, not the core portfolio, not the S&P 500 itself. You have something else. You're selling your dental practice. You're diversifying some concentrated stock position. You have a real estate thing that you're selling. You're exiting an angel investment. Any capital gain event, you have a tax bill. You can offset an unlimited amount of that capital gain with capital losses. You have $1 million in gains, you have $1 million in losses, you offset completely that $1 million in gains and save whatever the 250K or whatever the number is that you would have had to pay in taxes, right? On top of that, and you can offset $3,000 a year in ordinary income, W-2 income, if you all have W-2 income. And there's no limit to how much in cap gains you can offset with losses. And the unused cap losses, let's say in the first year you've harvested a lot in losses, you haven't used it, it carries forward until you die. You can carry them forward and use them in later years, right? And so that's kind of the advantage. If you wanted to think of it more simply, I know Paulie asked me that earlier, the tax alpha, if you want to think about it, depending on your tax rate, if the market is doing 10% a year, your alpha is between 1.36 to 3.10. And if you multiply that by 10, by 20, you'll see how that starts to make a big difference over time, right? You're getting a huge advantage over everyone else, really without taking much risk, right? It's just using taxes, not using some kind of a like market beating type alpha that you're kind of hypothesizing. And so that's kind of the main use case, which is offsetting outside gains. So you may ask yourself, well, I don't have outside gains. I work in a job, I save my money, I invest in the Vanguard ETF. One day I'm going to stop working, I'm going to draw down from that ETF, and then I'm going to live off of that. So how does that help me? Well, let's look at that hypothetical scenario. And just to make the numbers easy, I chose round numbers like $1 million portfolio, 15-year horizon, $10,000 a month in year 5, right? You're going to invest in the first 5 years. Year 5, you're going to take out 10K a month, and then a tax rate of 28.1%. And this is, by the way, if we increase this tax rate, the advantage would be much larger, but we want it to be conservative and count for people who live in states without much of a tax burden. And so this is what it looks like, right? You have $1 million, and this is an ETF, right? You put in the $1 million, you don't pay any taxes the first 5 years. Obviously, you haven't sold, and then you start paying taxes as you withdraw money, right? You take the blue kind of, and these are cumulative. And by the end, by year 16, you decide to sell everything, right? And you pay the rest in taxes, right? And this is kind of how it goes. This is a default, right? And now let's see what a direct index does. And what a direct index does is in the first 5 years, behind the scenes, what it's doing is it's generating capital losses. And remember, you're not using these because you don't have cap gains. So you're sort of like carrying them forward year after year. And then when you start selling, what happens is you have losses, right? You're not going to incur gains. So it starts to chip away at these losses slowly. And then what happens is your first tax payment when you have a direct index is by year 13, right? Way down the line. You haven't paid taxes for 7 years, right? Whereas with an ETF, it's here by year 5, right? So what a direct index does, this is a classic tax deferral use case, right? You have not paid your taxes for 7 years. You pocket that money. You're compounding that money. It's compounding in your pocket, not in the IRS's pocket. And then you're paying your taxes later, right? And of course, not to sound morbid, but if you sort of like die over here, you would have paid 0 taxes, whereas in the ETF case, you would have paid taxes, right? Because there's a $24 million estate limit that barely anyone sort of like gets to. And so that's kind of the story. And now you may ask yourself, okay, this sounds all good. But at what cost? Am I paying a big premium for that? And is that cost worth it? Or are the tax savings worth the cost that I'm going to pay? And we're gonna basically answer that question with a chart. But first, I'm gonna make a couple of quick assumptions that A, you're gonna harvest 40% of your investment in losses. We saw that Vanguard chart that showed that. And then you have cap gains outside of the direct index to offset, right? And save in your tax bill. So again, $1 million portfolio, blended tax rate 30%, 10% annual return, 30 years. What you'll notice is that there's this product you can, by the way, you probably, if you have a wealth manager, they're probably selling this to you, like a Fidelity SMA. You're paying your wealth advisor maybe 50 bips, and this thing is 25 bips. Maybe you're paying 75 bips, right? Think of it this way. The Vanguard ETF is 3 basis points. VOO is 0.03%. So if you're paying someone 0.75, you're paying someone 0.72% more to just do tax loss harvesting. Is it worth it? You're paying this fee forever, right? For a long time. And so, every year, so sure, in the first 5 years, you get a tax advantage. That's all good. You're feeling happy. But then in later years, you're paying this tax, this fee, uh, constantly against your portfolio, right? Until at some point, the tax savings are just not worth it. You should have just bought the ETF, right? And not worried about the tax savings. And so that's the case for low cost direct indexing. That's why Frec we do is we offer direct indexing at a very low cost, at a small premium to the ETF. If the ETF is 3 bips, 3 basis points or 0.03%, we're 0.1%. And at that extra fee, the tax savings are very much worth it, right? And you'll see actually that the blue line goes up. You have a real advantage from compounding the benefits, right? And and the truth is, if I extend this x-axis to 150 years, even the blue line touches the x-axis, right? But none of us live that long, right? For now, at least. So, it makes sense at the right price. It doesn't make sense at these expensive prices where they're offered. Even the Fidelity product, Fitfolio at 0.4, is too expensive. If you're a long-term holder, by year 20, you're gonna say, well, this is not harvesting losses. I'm paying a lot. Can I take this out? And then you're left with managing hundreds of stocks. And so, yeah, we got a lot of clients who come to us from these more expensive providers. Okay, so a couple of other things. So I talked about all the indices that we have, but actually, before I do this, maybe I should mention some things about Frec. Frec is a startup. We are a Series A company. We're backed by Greylock. Greylock is one of the best top VCs in Silicon Valley. We raised $26.4 million from them. Greylock invested in companies like Facebook early on, LinkedIn, other big giants. They're big in enterprise and AI and security. So they saw this opportunity. So we're a well-funded startup, right? And also your assets are not with Frec. They're with a partner custodian called Apex Clearing. And Apex Clearing has $200 billion in assets. And they custody other folks like Betterment, like SoFi, like Ally. They used to custody Robinhood before Robinhood went self-clearing, Wealthfront. And so they're an established player in the space. You actually get a login to see your assets on Apex. So before I talk about Frec, I just wanted to give that background about us. Yeah, so we have all these indices that you can choose from. Basically, whatever you can buy as an ETF, we probably have here. And then you can construct a portfolio where each one of your indices, right, is doing its own tax loss harvesting. You can have a small cap, a large cap, international, etc. And then you can kind of rebalance it whenever you want to. And then you have self-managed stocks, right? And then you can borrow. You can borrow against your entire portfolio. This is another feature that wealth managers give you access to, right? You can borrow at a fee of Fed plus here Fed plus 1 or 5.33%. So if you need liquidity or need to renovate that kitchen or make that investment somewhere, you can take a line of credit against your portfolio. And we show you exactly how the safety of doing that, right? How far the stock market, how far of a buffer you have before before you get a margin call. And then you can transfer stocks to Frec, right? Very easy, 5 clicks. The stocks come over with their cost basis. So there's no like sell and rebuy. The stocks come in, and then now you can borrow against them. You can use them to fund a direct index. If you already have NVIDIA, for example, you don't have to rebuy it again to put it in the S&P 500. You can use this NVIDIA that you've got. Yeah, it's all easy. So, okay, I'll quickly go through what's the catch. I'm seeing some questions. Maybe I'll save them for the Q&A. But okay, there may be some of you may be wondering about this. And you know, we like to sort of answer these questions up front. What about wash sales? We handle it all for you. So if you have multiple indices and we're doing all this trading to get you the tax losses, you don't have to worry about wash sales. We handle that for you. Our algorithm avoids them all. If you're more advanced in your investment journey and you're comfortable taking some wash sales, you can turn on a setting on Frec, say enable strategic wash sales, and we'll get you 16% more losses harvested, right? So that's an advanced thing, not for everyone. But if you want to read up on it, we've got an article on it. Frec is designed, by the way, for for someone who's an average investor who's just hands off, who's busy, right? You've got your practice, you've got your job, you work in tech, you have a day job, you're busy, you don't have to watch it. You just basically check it once in a while to see that, oh, great, I have all these tax losses harvested, and I'm tracking the performance. Some of you may have questions about tracking the index. The tracking error is plus or minus a maximum of 1% per year. That's what the algorithm tries to accomplish for you. And you have an equal chance of being plus, actually, than you have of being minus 1%. And you can see there's an AQR paper on this. We also have our own paper to see the science behind it. You can also change your tracking preferences. You can say, well, I don't want to track so closely. Get me more losses. I care more about the losses than the tracking. So you can change that on Frec. And then, the question is, do I get stuck with, what if I want to like wind out? What if I don't want to be here, right? How do I get out of this strategy? You can just self-manage. You can transfer the stocks out in kind to the destination. And whatever losses you harvested, you can use to sell out the long tail as well. And then the tax forms, no, they're not a nightmare, actually. They're quite easy. You get, a 1099-B at the end of the year with a total cost basis, just a summary sheet of the total disallowed losses or total losses or short-term and long-term, and you can use them against your income, right? Okay, and we talked a bit about the platform safety, right? And so, yeah, with Apex, we've got SIPC insurance, $500,000. We have a lot of security in place and trading oversight. Cool. So we are building this long-short direct index. We're building a crypto index as well. We're pretty excited about that. And the way you get started is basically if you have money today that's going into buying ETFs. In fact, I should say, given the market conditions today and yesterday, if you've bought any ETFs in the past year, they're probably trading at a loss today. And so those are great candidates to sell out of those ETFs, book that loss, and put that money, instead of in another ETF, put that money into a direct index so that it's continuing to generate losses for you, right? And so that's kind of the second use case, I think. Okay, so yeah, that's it. We can take questions, and also I want to point out this this referral code that can get you $75,000 managed for free. No fees for the first 75K.
Well, this is awesome. We do the question before you unshare, though. Can you or Isabel, can they like put that link in the chat so people could click on it? I think Rachel from my team did, but just to make sure, Isabel can confirm it's in the chat. You just click on this link in the chat to get the sponsor nacho promo. You can thank me for making a company named after an appetizer, Mo. So that's me really giving the gift here now. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to share my screen in a minute so I can choose. And we also have some regular Q&As. While I'm doing that, would you be able to answer this one in the Q&A? The money that we invest is already taxed. So what is the benefit unless we lose money in investments to offset the business?
Yeah, so basically the money that you're investing, sure, it's been already taxed, right? You probably earned it somehow. It's already taxed. But now that when you think forward, right? If you put that same money into an ETF, right? You're not getting any additional tax benefits from that money, right? But if you put it in a direct index, now you get capital losses for future gains, right? And so that's kind of the key thing, is you want to offset future gains. You don't want to be paying taxes. You want to build what they call a shield against capital gain taxes, right? And by building that shield, you end up, collecting these losses so that in the future, if you have any other gain event, you're not taxed on it.
Hold on one sec. I'm just bringing up my list of questions here for a second. But oh, sorry, I'm here. Um, as we're doing this, if there's any other questions in the chat that you see, you can ask. I'm going to bring up some of the questions that I put together here in just a second. Um, One question that I think Dennis would have is, dental students have a lot of debt, right? They have a lot of debt. And I know it's not a financial advising show, but have you seen people who, I did an Instagram poll on this today and someone said, we can't invest because we're paying off our debt. Whether it's just through experience, could you just maybe talk about why you can still make wise financial decisions even when you are in debt?
Yeah, totally. So, I would say like I would look at it in the perspective of what is my interest rate on that debt, right? And if you locked in that debt at a good interest rate, then you have to think of an arbitrage between, well, if I put some of my money in the stock market, I know that the stock market over the long term, over like a 20, 30-year horizon, is going to return 10.5% a year, right? And if my debt is costing me 2% a year, then why am I rushing to pay off debt at very good favorable interest rates when I can start to allocate some money into my future, right? And start earning that 10.5, start building that wealth. And so, to your point, Paul, this is not financial advice, and it really does depend on the person's circumstances, their upcoming expenses, and their financial planning. But if you have really this product is a good fit for someone who is already allocating money to ETFs. If you have a Vanguard account, you're already putting money into an ETF, consider this as an alternative. This is a product that competes with an ETF. It's a better vehicle in terms of tax savings, in terms of tax efficiency than an ETF.
And also, as someone who's been in debt, I'm 47, so I'm not 25 anymore. I'm not 67. I'll share, while this is not financial advice, there's just some best practices and behaviors to get used to doing early in your life, right? And I think sometimes that we forget that it might not always come down to the exact amount of percentages inside the percentages. And it's just as simple as I am going to start thinking about my financial future as soon as possible. And if you go on Dental Nachos Facebook groups, there are many dentists who really, 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 really regret not thinking about their financial future sooner, from overspending to buying too fancy a car to being too focused on debt, not as investing. Any of the questions here, Mo, that you want to reinforce for the webinar audience here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one we kind of covered in a lot of detail. The second one is interesting. How are assets protected on Frec? So we are a FINRA licensed brokerage and SEC advisor as well, and so regulated advisor. And so we're under a lot of scrutiny from regulators. And so our assets, first of all, the assets are not on Frec, they're on Apex Clearing. And Apex is this large custodian, $200 billion in assets, and they custody Betterment and SoFi and plenty of other big names out there. And so, you have also SIPC insurance, SIPC, kind of like the FIDC, but for stocks. And so you have SIPC insurance as well of $500,000. The same policy that, by the way, Fidelity and Vanguard have. So that's kind of how your assets are safe.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying this. What I'll also ask for this audience and kind of as a dentist here is like, what have been some of the fulfilling, we all do things that fulfill us. I do Dentist Job Connect. It's fulfilling when I find an associate job. I solve two people's problems with one thing. The practice owner now has an associate so they can have more freedom, and now the associate has a job. When you do startup companies and you're an entrepreneur, you do things because you find them fulfilling. What has been fulfilling, whether it's a certain client story or having someone say, because of you, I now can afford to send my kids to a certain school, anything like that? Any fulfilling stories along your journey, Mo, from any of your clients?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, we've been running this company. We started this company 3 years ago, and we've been live with the product for a year and a half now. And I cannot tell you how many we love Frec emails we get from couples, from customers, and we have a channel on Slack on Frec internally for employees where we share these quote unquote love letters about Frec, and it's really awesome to see our customers love the product because like these customers, before we existed, had to use a wealth advisor, right? And the wealth advisor would basically rip them off, right? Like charge them a lot in fees, charge them 1% to get access to these tax savings. And they're keeping a lot more of their money now, right? If let's do the math on that 1%, by the way. This is a very fascinating calculation. Let's say you pay someone 1% of your money every year to manage it for you, right? And okay, and let's say you expect to live 50 years or something like that, or let's say you're quite young still, and you're like, well, I'm going to be healthy. I'm 30 years old. Maybe I'll live into my 80s, right? 1%, you're keeping 99% of your money now. So 99 to the power of 50, you basically keep 60% of your money, right? And I did this math for myself. I was like, well, I've got two kids. So what? So one kid will get 30%, the second kid will get 30, and the wealth advisor will get 40%. Is that fair? Why am I paying 1%? What value am I getting? They're allocating me into the three funds that everyone knows about, right? The S&P 500 or the US, fund, VXUS, international stocks, and some fixed income. I can do that myself. I know how to watch YouTube, right? A few videos in, and I'm like, okay, there's like three fund strategy, Bogglehead, keep costs down. But now I can also get my tax savings, right? And so we got a lot of these stories where we've unshackled people from the expenses of the wealth advisor. They're keeping a lot more of their wealth. They're getting the tax savings, and it's really fulfilling.
I like that, that share. I really am helping those couples because one of the things, and this is an example for our next question, is it's pretty wild to be a dentist where you go from $500,000 in debt to making $250,000 a year. You've skipped ages 23 to 27 where all of your friends were making 60, 70, 80, $90,000. You've never spent a day in business. You've been hanging out with other dental students like you who are clueless with this. And I actually can see how it becomes difficult to understand that emotionally. I had no money. Now I have a lot of money, but I don't feel like I have a lot of money. I'm paying off my debt. Should I buy a dental practice? And that's kind of this question here, which I know is not for, you can just comment on. It might be more for a financial planner, but for new grads, the student loans we have at interest is paying off the loans now better since the interest is high back when it was 2%. And I'm not holding you any financial advisor advice because we're both sharing that we're not financial advisors, but any comments on that?
Yeah, so it's funny because actually, my own brother is a dentist, and he kind of grappled with this question, and we talked about it a lot. And again, I want to highlight that it depends exactly on your personal situation. But if you have a long hold period, if you think you're a disciplined investor and you're building wealth for maybe future generations to come, right, and you have confidence in your income stream, there's a few things you need to do at the beginning. First thing I would say is, and what I told my brother Ziad is that, and he owns a dental practice now, by the way, is he grappled with all these kind of questions. Is the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got your emergency financial cushion in cash, right? At least 6 months of expenses for you and your family to ensure that if anything happens, recession hits, etc., you can outlive it, right? And then sort of like once you do that, then you want to look at your debt situation. And well, if your debt situation, if the interest rates are high on your debt, then it may make sense to actually bring those levels down, right? If your interest, I would say if you're paying 4, 5, 6% on debt, then yeah, I would definitely be in a situation where I'm trying to bring down that balance, right? But if you're locked into, in my brother's situation, it was locked into a very low rate, back through during ZIRP, right? I think it was a 2% rate or something like that. And my argument was, well, this is like free money, right? Like if you think about the inflation rate, and if you put the same money in a money market fund, a money market fund is like almost zero risk, right? And you're getting paid at the time 5%, and you're paying a 2% interest. That 3% arbitrage exists, right? And so yeah, it really does depend on the situation and the circumstances.
It's really great advice. And I'll also add, I put in the two things in the chat. One is the NATO sponsor deal on Frec. And two is Student Loan Planners, another consult that I'd love, another sponsor I'd love you to meet because they help people manage their student loans so they can free up more funds to do a variety of things, whether it is investing, whether it is saving for a dental practice, whether it is both. Because if you just pay your student loans off based on feelings, there's a good chance you're going to do it wrong. You might pay too little, you might pay too much. One story from it was like a new dentist wanted to pay off all their loans, Mo, and live in their parents' basement and never save any money. And they did it. But then when you went to buy a dental practice, the bank did not think they were a good risk because they had no assets to their name, right? And that was a mistake. And it's important that you look at this holistically. Also, Awesome Isabel is putting things in the chat here. You can schedule a call. People can schedule a call with your team to do like a demo and talk to it before they jump in.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got a team of experts, of licensed professionals that can just look at your entire kind of financial picture and give you sort of like we'll give you impartial I guess input on like, hey, it doesn't look like you're a good fit, or yes, maybe this ETF that you own is a good fit, etc. So we can help with that.
Um, awesome. As we wrap up in a few minutes, I'm so impressed how many people showed up live to this. I know some of you watching on demand, but if you're here live, Mo invested his time and energy. He's helping us learn about something that's so important. He's supporting this group as a sponsor. I'm here to just share one thing in the chat that you learned that you thought about. You could be on the Nacho team. You could be a dentist. You could be an associate dentist. What's one thing you learned through this webinar that you're going to go do, you're going to think about? It actually, every time you watch one of these, Mo, it makes you think, I need to be doing more automatic investing. No matter how much you're doing, you're saying, hey, I need thinking of my kids, thinking of my financial future. And you said more than once, which was nice of you. It's morbid to think about it, but what if you're not here, right? What if you die? But also, dentists, I don't know the stats on this. They also have a chance of getting injured, right? They might not be dead, but they could be injured, no longer able to do their $300,000 a year job. So make sure you're making good decisions to protect. Someone said, definitely going to look more into building an investment portfolio myself. So you did an amazing job, Mo. I so appreciate you sharing this special deal with our community. I have these weights here next to me because I want to do bicep curls, like my shirt. So you have made us think about working out our financial fitness. Some of the things when you go on the Facebook group later, Mo, I said, why do dentists have the inability to retire on their own terms? I mean, people make hundreds of $1,000s a year for 30 years and they can't retire on their own terms. And you're being part of the solution to make that better.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the power of the stock market as an instrument for building wealth. Or when they do use it, they use it incorrectly. They stock pick, right? If you're tempted to go on Robinhood and choose one stock to buy, like no, it's very difficult. Instead, what people have figured out is instead of what is the saying? Instead of uh, picking the needle from the haystack. Buy
Yeah.
the haystack. Buy the
Yeah.
entire haystack, right? Buy the index fund. Buy the S&P 500. Buy the entire US stock market. And then that way you're betting on something larger. You're betting on the biggest, most thriving economy in the world, right? And in 10, 20, 30 years, if you look historically, the stock market and we have data going back 100 years on this, the S&P has done 10.5% a year, right? If you have a long time period. Now you have to tolerate the ups and downs of it, right? And the fluctuations. But really, if you're not dipping your toes and getting exposure to the U.S. market, or even just in general the equity markets, I would consider that. I would consider looking into it at least.
Yeah. It's an important thing. Dentistry is a complex career, but it's also filled with all types of financial challenges. And starting early, thinking about these things early, recognizing that your future you is going to need to use money too. I said to my intern, does he want to be working when he's 92? He said, no, he wants to retire at 50. I said, well, you better get started now. So it's so important to remember that. Thank you so much for sharing. Those of you who watched in, thank you for sharing your time with us. I really, truly appreciate it. If you want to get connected with Frec, just text Frec to 215-543-6454.
Awesome. Thank you so much.